early 1900s, a group of Italian writers and artists were united by the idea of admiration for industrialization. They renounced the old culture, aesthetic norms, and traditions in art. They put the machine age on a pedestal and called for the destruction of all institutions bound by traditions in the past, museums, libraries, and universities. They dreamed of a whole new world based on technological progress, renewed consciousness, and society. The poet Filippo Tommaso Marinetti was the leader of this group. He called the movement Futurism and united its members with the idea of modernity, aesthetics of speed, movement, and industrial development, written in his Futurist Manifesto, published in 1909. The Futurist Manifesto had declared, "We will glorify war, the world's only hygiene, militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of freedom bringers, beautiful ideas worth dying for, and scorn for woman." Futurists were intensely patriotic and propagandized that the war is necessary. Marinetti openly advocated against cultural tradition and feminism. His ideas included praising aggression, denying generally accepted norms of behavior, and placing the artist in a counterpoint to society. Futurists look for beauty in the image of the machine and the desire to recreate speed. Futurism quickly grew into an international movement, and Marinetti's poetry was followed by manifestos for nearly every type of art: painting, sculpture, architecture, music, photography, and cinema. The painters, Umberto Boccioni, Carlo Carra, Luigi Russolo, Gino Severini, and Giacomo Balla, signed their first manifesto in 1910. Futurists considered manifestos an art form and wrote hundreds of them. The first futuristic paintings did not have a general style or subject matter. In 1910 and 1911, the artists used the techniques of divisionism, fascinated by its scientific approach. Later Cubism contributed to the formation of Italian Futurism's artistic style. Severini was the first who adopted the methods of the Cubists after his visitation to Paris in 1911. The destructuring of form in search of the true image of matter, unaffected from the point of view and perspective, inspired the Futurists. They were looking for ways to express the dynamic and the energy of the object. This impact can be seen in Boccioni's Materia of 1912. The art critic Robert Hughes wrote, "In Futurism, the eye is fixed and the object moves, but it is still the basic vocabulary of Cubism, fragmented and overlapping planes." While some of the most famous works of Cubism are portraits, the Futurists focused on the movement in the city, machines, and the urban environment. The Street Enters the House from 1911, painted by Boccioni, Dynamic Hieroglyph of the Bal Tabarin 1912, painted by Severini, and Automobile at Speed 1913, painted by Russolo. The Futurists worshipped the speed of the machines of the future, the technology, the youth, and the power of violence. They saw in the industrialization of the city the path of mankind's technological triumph over nature. They declared classical art imitative and false, harmony and good taste as bourgeois, dismissed art critics as useless, ignored all the other themes and subjects from the past, and searched for inspiration in science. The key figures of the Italian Futurism were Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, Umberto Boccioni, Carlo Carra, Fortunato di Pero, Gino Severini, Giacomo Balla, and Luigi Russolo. They were passionate nationalists and appealed for the liberation of Italy from the weight of its past. Their ideas were against democracy and largely overlapped with fascist propaganda. Marinetti became actively involved in politics as a supporter of Benito Mussolini and participated in the creation of the Fascist Manifesto. Another leading figure of the Futurist movement, Carlo Carra, also wrote books concerning art. Some of his most famous paintings are The Funeral of the Anarchist Galley, The Enchanted Chamber, The Metaphysical Muse, and The Daughter of the West. He painted Leaving the Theater in 1911 with the divisionist technique. It shows figures of the people moving in different directions, going home at night after the end of the play. The horizon is tilted. People are acting as scattered energy, nothing more to hold them together under the streetlights. The same year he finished his Funeral of the Anarchist Galley. The large canvas represents the police attack and riot from 1904 after the anarchists were denied entry to the cemetery. This painting is more intense, with dominating red and black. The chaos in the crowd and the rising violence fill the whole composition. Umberto Boccioni, like Carra, was passionate futurist. He was a painter and sculptor, but he is also known as the main theorist of the artistic movement. In the beginning, he also followed the divisionist technique. In 1910 he painted The City Rises. The painting is considered his big first step into futurism. It depicts the construction of an electric power plant, most likely in Milan. In the center of the composition are men, who are trying to control a giant red horse. This represents one of the leitmotifs for the Futurists, which is the conflict between the human and nature. Futurists believe that humanity can subdue nature, that it can triumph over it. This picture is the apotheosis of the power of the male proletariat. The act of building this modern city is close to a myth coming to reality. In 1911, Boccioni painted The Laugh, and it is considered his first completely futuristic work. He turned his back on divisionism. Boccioni and his States of Mind, which includes 3 large panels, The Farewell, Those Who Go, and Those Who Stay, is one of the major statements of futuristic art. It represents the complex experience of the modern world together. This masterpiece attempts to convey feelings and sensations experienced in time. It represents the existence and motion of the object through space and the combination of memories, present awareness, and the expectation of future events. The artist interlace exterior scene and interior emotion in one whole. Boccioni's search for forms and images to present his ideas about the movement of energy led him to the sculpture as a form, and he began to work in 3-dimensional space. In 1913, he made the sculpture Unique Forms of Continuity in Space. It represents the relationship between the object and its environment and is one of the pieces, closely related to his theory of dynamism. The figure is fluid and does not represent the human anatomy, rather the body movement. He explored the theme further in Synthesis of Human Dynamism 1912, Speeding Muscles 1913, and Spiral Expansion of Speeding Muscles 1913. His ideas on sculpture were published in the Technical Manifesto of Futurist Sculpture in 1915. The Futurists were inspired by the work of scientist and photographer Étienne Jules Méry and his chronophotographic, time-based, studies. His work was significant in the development of several fields in science. His studies of mechanics of movement were replicated by Futurists. Before the birth of the cinema, Méry experimented with time-lapse photography. Giacomo Balla painted Dynamism of a Dog on a Leash, inspired by the works of Méry. The dog's feet, the leash, and the lady's legs are shown in continuous movements. The images are overlapping and creating a sense of motion in time. Giacomo Balla also created futuristic sculptures. His abstract reconstructions were movable and even made noises. One of his most famous paintings is Abstract Speed plus Sound. It is part of a triptych narrating the passage of a racing car through a landscape. In 1914, artistic differences between the Milan group, around Marinetti, Boccioni, and Balla, and the Florence group, around Carrà, Ardengo Soffici, and Giovanni Papini, created a rift in Italian futurism. The Florence group resented the dominance of Marinetti and Boccioni, whom they accused of trying to establish an immobile church with an infallible creed, and each group dismissed the other as bonded to the past. The experience of the war marked several futurists, particularly Marinetti. After the war, Marinetti revived the movement. This revival was called Second Futurism by writers in the 1960s. The art historian Giovanni Lista has classified futurism by decades: plastic dynamism, for the first decade; mechanical art, for the 1920s; aeroaesthetics, for the 1930s. Italian futurism became the unofficial style of fascism and reflected in architecture, interior design, and many other spheres. Marinetti remains famous in history not only for writing futuristic poetry and manifestos but also for leaving a mark on the development of the performing arts and theater. Like the Dadaist soirees, he offered to include the public. But while the Dadaists had a milder approach, the actions proposed by Marinetti included pinching, gluing to the seats, and purposefully inviting mentally ill or provocative spectators. He also preferred short forms and offered plays in one act and only one action, such as the firing of a bullet, walking a dog on stage, or just bringing down the curtain. Futurism is mostly an Italian phenomenon, but a parallel movement was formed in Russia in 1910. The Russian futurist advocated modernization and cultural rejuvenation and followed in the beginning Marinetti's manifesto. Later, in 1912, the manifesto, a slap in the face of public taste, was written by David Davidovich Berluk. Its influence spread later to cinema, literature, typography, politics, and propaganda. Although there were few groups, the Moscow-based literary group Hylaea was the most important one. Russian futurism also adopted ideas from French Cubism, which coined the name Cubo-Futurists, given by an art critic in 1913. Cubo-Futurism adopted ideas from Italian Futurism and French Cubism to create its own blended style of visual art. It emphasized the breakdown of forms, the use of various viewpoints, the intersection of spatial planes, and the contrast of color and texture. The focus was to show the intrinsic value of a painting, without it being dependent on a narrative. From a political point of view, Russian futurists differ from Italians mainly in their attitude to the First World War. Russian futurism ended shortly after the Russian Revolution of 1917, after which former Russian futurists either left the country or participated in the new art movements. Notable Russian futurists included Natalia Goncharova, Kazimir Malevich, Vladimir Mayakovsky, and Velimir Klebnikov. Although futurism is thought to have found its way to Marinetti's death, much of his influence could be found in subsequent movements. There are neo-futurism, post-futurism, retrofuturism, and many others, influenced by them. If you enjoyed this video, you can like it, subscribe to the channel, or share it. This will be a sign for us that we are doing something valuable.